Diana Ross is 81 years old now. She's still touring, still filling arenas, still closing shows with the same voice that made her the face of Motown. But threaded through 6 decades of hits and headlines is one relationship that has never fully left the spotlight: her bond with Michael Jackson. It wasn't a secret. Michael talked about it himself, in interviews, in his memoir, in song. What's remarkable isn't that the truth is finally coming out. It's that it was always there, in plain sight, for anyone willing to look closely at what he actually said and what she actually did. This is that story, told through the record, not rumor, but the documented history of two of the most famous people in music. The story most people know starts in 1969, when Motown announced that Diana Ross had discovered a group of young brothers from Gary, Indiana, called the Jackson 5. It made for a perfect narrative. The reigning queen of Motown, still riding high with the Supremes, handing off the torch to a dazzling 11-year-old named Michael. Motown built an entire introduction around it. Diana Ross even hosted a television special presenting the group to America. The truth, according to most biographers and Motown insiders, is more complicated. Berry Gordy, the label's founder, is generally credited with the real decision to sign the group, with Motown executive Susanna Passé and singer Gladys Knight playing significant roles in bringing them to Gordy's attention in the first place. The Diana Ross discovery story was, by most accounts, a marketing decision, a way to attach an already beloved star to a group of unknowns and guarantee them attention. Michael himself later acknowledged as much, though for years he let the myth stand, because in a strange way, it became true anyway. Whether or not she found them, Diana Ross became genuinely, deeply involved in Michael's life almost immediately. When the Jackson family relocated to Los Angeles in the early 1970s, Michael spent significant time at Diana Ross's home. His mother, Katherine Jackson, wrote about this period in her own memoir, describing how her son grew close to Ross and began referring to her as a kind of second mother. Ross, by multiple accounts, took an interest in more than just his career. She reportedly encouraged his curiosity about art and creativity, exposing him to painting and other interests outside of music and performance. For a child who had spent his early years on stage under his father's demanding management, that kind of attention from an adult who wasn't trying to extract a performance from him left a mark. Michael would reference this period for the rest of his life as foundational, a rare stretch of his childhood where someone famous, successful, and immensely busy still made time for him. By 1977, Michael Jackson was 19, a few years removed from his run as a child star and looking for his own identity outside the Jackson 5. That year, he took his first major film role in The Wiz, an all-black reimagining of The Wizard of Oz, playing the Scarecrow opposite Diana Ross's Dorothy. The film was shot in New York, away from Motown's Los Angeles machinery, and the production put the two of them in each other's company for months. Critically and commercially, The Wiz underperformed. Reviews were mixed, and the box office numbers were disappointing relative to its budget. But for Michael, the value of the project had little to do with ticket sales. Working alongside Ross day after day deepened a friendship that had already spanned nearly a decade. It was also on this set that Michael first worked closely with Quincy Jones, the film's musical supervisor, a connection that would go on to define Thriller, Off the Wall, and Bad. In that sense, The Wiz quietly reshaped the rest of his career, even as it flopped in theaters. The most direct evidence of how Michael felt about Diana Ross doesn't come from tabloids or unnamed sources. It comes from Michael himself, on the record, more than once. In a December 1982 interview with Ebony magazine, a reporter asked him directly whether there were any women in his life. Michael's answer became one of the most quoted lines of his career. "It's Diana Ross. I love her." When the interviewer pressed him, asking whether he meant it in a big sister sense, he said no, that was what he meant, and that he was, in fact, saying he wanted to marry her. He repeated versions of this sentiment for years afterward. In his 1988 autobiography, Moonwalk, he described her as his mother, his lover, and his sister, all combined into one person, and said that feeling had never gone away since she'd taken the time, when he was young, to teach him about art. In a separate 1984 interview, when asked if he and Ross were still close, his answer was simply, "Always. She's my best friend. I love her." There was a 14 to 15-year age gap between them, and by the standard of the industry and the tabloid press of the era, his declarations were treated as a curiosity, something to raise eyebrows over rather than take seriously. But Michael made no attempt to walk any of it back. He said it plainly, more than once, across more than one decade. Whatever the nature of his feelings, they were not fully reciprocated in the way Michael hoped. In October 1985, Diana Ross married Norwegian shipping executive Arne Næss Jr. It was a defining moment in her personal life. The two would go on to have 2 children together before eventually divorcing years later, and it closed the door, publicly at least, on any romantic future between her and Michael. How Michael actually processed this privately isn't something that's been documented in his own words, and it would be dishonest to invent a version of heartbreak that he never described himself. What is documented is that he continued to speak about Ross with the same warmth and intensity in interviews well after a marriage, and that their public friendship, appearing together at award shows, working together professionally, continued for the rest of his life. 2 songs that connected to Diana Ross more than any others in Michael's catalog: Dirty Diana from 1988's Bad, and Remember the Time from 1991's Dangerous. Dirty Diana sparked speculation from the moment it was released, largely because of the title and the timing. It arrived not long after Ross's marriage. Michael himself said publicly that the song was about aggressive fans and groupies who pursue musicians, not about any specific person, and there is no verified account of him ever confirming otherwise. Some biographers and journalists have speculated that the song carries an emotional undercurrent connected to Ross regardless of an official subject, but that remains interpretation, not confirmed fact. And it's worth saying plainly that Jackson's own explanation for the song has never been retracted or contradicted by him. Remember the Time is a different case. According to Michael's brother Jermaine and other people close to him, that song has been described as having been written with Diana Ross in mind. A more wistful, affectionate callback to their history than Dirty Diana ever suggested. Michael also produced and helped write Ross's 1982 single Muscles, a piece of direct professional collaboration between them that often gets overshadowed by the speculation about their personal relationship. The 1990s and 2000s brought the most difficult chapters of Michael Jackson's public life: the 1993 molestation allegations involving Jordan Chandler, the fallout from the 2003 Martin Bashir documentary, and the 2005 criminal trial in Santa Maria, California, where he was ultimately acquitted on all counts. Diana Ross did not make frequent public statements defending Michael during these years. She largely stayed out of press coverage, which was its own kind of statement in an industry where many public figures rushed to distance themselves from him. What's documented is that their friendship endured these years rather than fracturing. She continued to be described by Michael and by people around him as one of the most significant relationships of his life straight through to his death, reinforced most concretely by the decision he made years earlier about who should raise his children if something happened to him. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009. Diana Ross's public statement, released shortly afterward, read, "I can't stop crying. This is too sudden and shocking. I am unable to imagine this. My heart is hurting. I am in prayer for his kids and the family." When his 2002 will was filed with the Los Angeles County Probate Court days later, it contained a detail that surprised much of the public and confirmed, in the most concrete way possible, how much trust Michael placed in her. The will named his mother, Catherine Jackson, as the guardian of his 3 children. But it went further. If Catherine were unable or unwilling to serve as guardian through death, illness, or any other circumstance, Michael named Diana Ross as the person he wanted to raise Prince, Paris, and Blanket in her place. Not any of his siblings. Not Debbie Rowe, the biological mother of his 2 oldest children. Diana Ross. It's worth being precise about what this clause did and didn't mean. It was a contingency, not an active appointment. Catherine Jackson remained the children's guardian, and that arrangement has continued for years since, including through a period in 2012 when a temporary guardianship dispute within the Jackson family briefly raised the question of Ross's role again. At that time, Ross's own public comment was brief and measured. She said the matter was a private family issue and declined to elaborate. She has never publicly sought a more active role in raising the children, but the fact that Michael named her at all in a legal document meant to protect his most important asset, his kids, says something about where she stood in his life that no interview quote fully captures. In March 2019, the HBO documentary, Leaving Neverland, reignited public scrutiny of Michael Jackson, featuring allegations from two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who said Jackson had sexually abused them as children. The film prompted radio stations to pull his music and reopen a national conversation about his legacy that had never fully settled. Diana Ross responded publicly on Twitter days after the documentary aired. She wrote that it was on her heart that morning to say she believed and trusted that Michael Jackson was and remained a magnificent, incredible force to her and to many others. She closed the post referencing her own 1965 hit with the Supremes, writing, "Stop in the name of love." It was a brief statement, not a detailed defense or a rebuttal of the specific allegations in the film, and it drew criticism from people who felt any public defense of Jackson at that moment was tone-deaf given the seriousness of the claims. But it was also undeniably consistent, the same instinct to stand publicly with him that had defined her posture since 1969, expressed one more time, 50 years and one death later. So what is the real story, stripped of embellishment? Diana Ross and Michael Jackson met when he was a child, and she was already a star. She took a personal interest in him that went beyond professional obligation, and he never stopped talking about how much that meant to him. He said, in his own words, across multiple interviews in his own memoir, that his feelings for her were more complicated than simple friendship. Mother, sister, lover, all at once, in his own phrasing. She didn't return those feelings in the romantic sense he wanted. She built her own family with someone else. But whatever the imbalance in how each of them experienced the relationship, the friendship itself survived nearly 4 decades, scandal, marriage, distance, and public scrutiny, right up until his death and beyond it, in the form of a legal document that named her as the person he trusted most to raise his children if his mother couldn't. There was no single, dramatic confession Diana Ross needed to make at 81 to reveal any of this. The truth was never really hidden. Michael told it himself, over and over, in his own words, for the better part of 30 years. What's changed is simply that enough time has passed, and enough of the record has been gathered in one place for people to actually notice. She's still performing, still turning up on New Year's Eve broadcasts and headlining amphitheaters at an age when most performers have long since stopped touring. And somewhere in that 6-decade career, tucked between the Supremes' records and the solo hits, is a friendship with one of the most scrutinized men in the history of American music. A friendship that, when you actually go back and read what both of them said and did, was exactly as significant as it always appeared to be. What do you think Michael Jackson would say if he could see how their story is remembered today? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look back at music history, subscribe for more.